Hello, welcome to my QA channel. I will speak about QA theory here. Not to miss new videos, click the subscribe button. So, how to write test cases for manual testing? QA engineers have to deal with different kind of documentation, and in this video, I will tell you about such artifacts as test cases. So, what is a test case? A test case is a set of inputs, execution conditions, and expected results designed to test a feature or behavior of a software tool. A test case can also be understood as a corresponding document representing a formal record of a test case. Test cases are usually grouped in a test suite. Test case suite or test suite or test set is a set of several test cases for a component or system under test where the pass condition of one test is often used as the precondition for the next one. There are high-level and low-level test cases. High-level test case is a test case without concrete values for input data and expected results, covers general ideas and actions similar in nature to a detailed checklist item. It can serve as starting point for conducting exploratory testing or for creating low-level test case. These test cases define the functionality of a product in a broader way without going into deep functionality. Like if we have to write high-level test case for login functionality, we will test that user should be able to log in successfully with valid credentials. And low-level test case is a test case with the concrete values for input data and expected results. It is a completely ready-to-run test cases and is generally the most classic type of test case. Beginning testers are most often taught to write just such tests because writing down all the data in details is much easier than understanding what information can be neglected without reducing the value of the test case. Why do we write tests? The basic objective of writing test cases is to validate the test coverage of an application. We can execute testing without test cases, but the presence of test cases allows to structure and systematize the approach to testing that is necessary for big projects, to calculate test coverage metrics and take measures to increase it. Without test cases, we will not have information about the coverage of functionality by tests. To track correspondence of the current situation according to the plan. How many test cases will be needed, how many are already there, how many have been completed from the plan for increasing activity. Clarify mutual understanding between the customer, developers, and testers. Test cases often show the application's behavior much more clearly than it's reflected in the requirements. To store information for long-term use and exchange of experience between employees and teams. To conduct regression testing and retesting. To improve the quality of requirements. Writing checklists and test cases is a good technique for testing requirements. And the last one of purposes is quickly bring up to date a new employee who has recently joined the team. And what is the task coverage? Task coverage is the degree expressed as a percentage to which a specified coverage item. For example, we have a task coverage for 70%. It means that we have task cases that covers 70% of the requirements. So, what is a life cycle of a test case? The life cycle of a test case is a set of states in which test case can be. So, I will show you the life cycle. It looks like here. Yeah. So we see here new state. It is A typical initial state of almost any artifact, the test case automatically enters this state after it's created. And the next one is planned. A test case in this state when it's full, and the next one is planned. A test case in this state when it is either explicitly included in the plan for the next testing iteration or at least ready for execution. Not tested. In some test case management systems, this state replaces the previous state planned. Finding a task case in this state means that it is ready to be executed, but has not yet been executed. Next, work in progress. If a task case takes a long time to complete, it can be put in this state to emphasize the fact that work is in progress and results can be expected soon. If execution of a task case takes a little time, this state is usually skipped and the task case is immediately transferred to in one of the following three states like failed, paced, blocked. So, skipped. There are situations when the execution of a task case is cancelled due to lack of time or a change in the testing logic. Failed. This state means that a defect was found during the execution of a task case, which consists of the fact that the expected result for at least one step of the task case does not match the actual result. Paced. This state means that during the execution of the test case, no defects were found related to discrepancy between the expected and actual results of its steps. Blocked. This state means that for some reason the test case cannot be executed. Closed is a very rare case because the test is usually left in the failed, paced, blocked, skipped states. But in some management systems, the test case is transferred to this state to emphasize the fact that at this iteration of testing, all actions with it are completed. And the last one is not ready. As you can see from the scheme, a test case can be transferred to this state at any time if an error is detected in it or if the requirements for which it was written change, or if another situation occurs that does not allow reading the test case suitable for execution and transfer to other states. So this test case life cycle may differ from company to company and is considered more of a set possible states rather than a strict life cycle. What is the difference between a test scenario and test case? The test scenario gives the idea of what we have to test. Test scenarios are detailed description or records of how a user will interact with an application during software testing. For example, test scenario is verify sign-in of an application. And test cases for the scenario will be first one, enter valid login and valid password. Second is enter invalid login and valid password. Next one is enter valid login and invalid password. And the last one, enter invalid login and invalid password. So we have 4 test cases for just one test scenario. So how to write test cases? Look at the main attributes. The main attributes of our test case are test case ID, priority, requirement related to task case, module and submodule of an application, test case name, test case description, preconditions, steps, test data, expected results, and status. So, test case ID, it is each test case should be represented by a unique ID. It is good practice to follow some naming conventions for better understanding and discrimination purposes. Priority of test cases show how is important this functionality or requirement for planning and prioritizing the execution of the test cases and understanding the priority of found defects. And we have to specify requirements related to a test case. It can be a few or just one requirement to validate test coverage of an application and make the requirement traceability matrix. Requirements traceability matrix, it is a document that demonstrates the relationship between requirements and other artifacts. And then we write the name of the model and submodel of an application related to the test case. We have to divide an application by models and submodels first, which represents a hierarchy of an application. For example, we have module account, which with the submodels like sign up, sign in, my orders, my details, etc. And another important thing is test case name, which represents the main idea or goal of a test case. So when you see the name, you have to understand what this case is gonna be about. There are a lot of approaches how to create the best name for a test case. Some companies have requirements for how the name should look. The common template for the test case name is feature, scenario, and expected result. For example, login, valid credentials, success. I prefer usually use a bit another template, and I call these blocks like test case number, model, submodel, and test case idea. For example, number of a test case is L1, module is account, submodule is login, and the test case idea is valid credentials. I use the number of test cases first because sometimes we have to execute them one after the other in a specific order, so it helps in the sorting of test cases in the correct order. So we immediately see what module and submodule we're gonna test here, and the main idea of the test is to verify valid credential. I guess it's more clear way to name test cases. It is just my opinion. So, and anyway, the template of test cases might be vary from company to company and depends on tools. Companies usually have specific regulation for the formalization of test cases to maintain a common style for all test cases, and you just should follow them. In a test case description field, we will specify any important thing related to the test case. Specify preconditions as step that we have to complete before start executing the test case. Steps, it is test instructions on what we will execute and have to get expected results after execution. Test data, it is data that we use to complete the step of the test case, for example, specific credentials for the authorization test case, and status shows us the current state of the test case, like new, work in progress, paced, blocked, skipped, etc. Well, let's see the examples. Depending on the tool that we use for storing and designing test cases, they might look different. I will show you some examples of templates an Excel file. The first one looks like Zephyr for Jira template. In my last project, I always used Jira for low-level test cases and Confluence for high-level test cases. These tools are common and often used in many companies. In Jira, we can create reusable issues with test cases like this, group those cases into task suites, and plan as many cycles for the execution of test cases as we need. Let's move on and see the base example that you can use for your freelance project maybe, or small projects in company. Here is all main attributes of a test case. So let's look tips to write effective tests. The first one is keep it clear to understand, easy to execute, and simple to update. The second one is keep all the steps of a test case atomic and precise. The next one is mention the steps with the correct sequence and correct mapping to the expected results. The first step is make it integrated with task plan, and other test cases. The fifth one is, after documenting test cases, review them as tester and check if the test cases match to criteria of good test cases. Don't forget about test data. Give testers a range of test data that covers all important tests. Be a contributor and suggest any ideas for improving functionality. Always think as an end user and identify test scenarios of the critical path to judge the practical value of the most used test cases. So let's look on characteristic of good test cases. Even a well-designed test case can be of poor quality. Characteristic of good test cases look similar to good criteria of requirements. A good test cases satisfies the following criteria: clear, concise, consistent, and complete. When anyone has no assumptions in the test case, description, steps, expected results, etc. And a test case has got to be categorized and prioritized. That means every single test case must be prioritized. It helps with the test planning and prioritizing found defects. Every test case should belong to a specific category which describes a specific functionality. Test cases should be simple and specific. Anyone in the test team should be able to execute the test cases without the author's help. Traceable to requirements. The main purpose of test cases is to validate the test coverage of an application. To validate coverage, we need to understand what requirements were covered by test cases. So we have to specify requirements related to a test case, of course. The next one is repeatable and reusable. It is easy. We will reuse those test cases as much as we can. For example, every regression test iteration. Next one, necessary and up-to-date. If this test case is not needed anymore, it must be excluded from the set of test cases, of course. If it's outdated, then it must be updated or removed from the set if it's no longer needed. Reasonable probability of catching a defect. That means that we don't need to create test cases that aren't able to catch any defects. Compliant with regulation. Companies might have different regulations and you have to follow them, of course. Correctness. Writing without grammar errors or slang words. Neither too simple nor too complex. You need to find a balance between test cases that are too complex, which are over-detailed, and test cases that are too simple, which may miss some important details. So here is a list of the most popular tools. You read more about each one on the internet. It is Excel, of course, Zephyr for Jira or TestRail, and Destiny. Destiny is a free tool, so you can use it if you work as a freelancer, for example. Well, we spoke about the main points of test cases and how to write them. The best way to improve the quality of test cases is to practice as much as you can. Always revise your previous test cases, test them for good criteria, and follow effective tips and company regulation as well. It is much easier that you can think about it. Don't hesitate to click the like button. That helps to see this video for more people. Subscribe if you'd like to watch more information about QA principles. Write down below your thoughts or questions. Bye bye.